2 buckets, one stacked inside the other. A pile of weeds that were headed for a trash bag 20 minutes ago. And in about 3 weeks, a slow drip of something dark collecting in the bottom. That's the whole factory. If you can talk a bakery, a deli, or a restaurant kitchen into handing over 2 used food-grade buckets, the core of this costs essentially nothing. A lot of them will, because they pay to have those buckets hauled away. One drill bit is the only tool that matters. The spigot is optional. The weeds are already growing. So that's the free part, and it's true. But before you pour a single drop on a single plant, there's something about that liquid almost every tutorial gets wrong. It starts with the name they give it and ends with the number they tell you to dilute it by. Both are going to cost somebody a good tomato plant this summer. Build first, then we'll talk about what's in the jar. 2 buckets, same size, so one nests inside the other. 5-gallon is standard, but any pair works as long as they stack. Food grade matters, something that carried frosting or pickles, not driveway sealer. The inner bucket does the work. Drill the bottom full of holes, a 1/4 inch, 20 or 30 across the base. A strainer, not a colander. Then punch a few small holes around the upper rim, above where the material will sit. Those are for air, and they matter more than people think. The outer bucket stays whole. That's your collection chamber. Now the part almost everyone gets wrong, the gap. Most pairs nest with an inch or 2 of space at the bottom, and that space is your reservoir. Some nest nearly flush. 2 bricks in the outer bucket before you seat the inner one gets your gap back. Without it, the liquid sits in the material and sours. The spigot is a convenience, not a requirement. Drill low on the outer wall. Seat the tap with rubber washers both sides. Test with plain water first. For the truly $0 version, lift the inner bucket out and pour. Then cover it, plain uncoated cardboard, or a lid resting loosely on top. Never sealed down tight, or it goes truly airless and truly foul. And keep it in shade. Full sun on a dark bucket in July turns this into something you can smell from the porch. That's the build. 15 minutes, 1 drill. But the holes are not the interesting part. What you put in them is. Here's where I part company with most of what you'll find online. Green plant material is the engine of this thing, not kitchen scraps. Peels, fruit, and melon rinds are mostly water and sugar. They bring very little to the liquid, and they bring fruit flies, wasps, a smell you'll regret, and an animal problem. Send them to the compost pile and keep this bucket green. Chop what goes in, a few passes with shears, then pack it down hard. Fresh green leaves are already around 90% water, so you don't add any. The weight presses that water out of the cells, and it drains through the holes on its own. Now, the twist. A lot of people will call what's in that bottom bucket compost tea. It isn't, and the difference is practical, not academic. Compost tea starts with finished compost, already broken all the way down, steeped in water. What you have is liquid draining out of material, still in the middle of breaking down, carrying whatever was riding on those leaves the day you cut them. That doesn't make it dangerous. It makes it a root zone product. Pour it at the base of the plant, into the soil. Don't spray it over lettuce you plan to eat Thursday. Wash your hands, wash your produce. Use the caution you'd use around fresh manure. That's the whole safety conversation, and it costs nothing. Which leaves the question sitting quietly under all of this. How strong is that stuff, exactly? To answer it, I want to take you to a 3-quarter-acre field in Essex, England, in 1958. Lawrence D. Hills started working with comfrey in 1948. 10 years later, he set up a trial ground at Bocking, in Essex, 3/4 of an acre, rented for £10 a year. That trial ground became the Henry Doubleday Research Association, known today as Garden Organic, and the strain that won his trials as a plant feed was Bocking 14, named for the ground it grew on. But the cultivar isn't what matters to you. standing over 2 buckets in your own yard. What matters is the question he was chasing, because it's the exact question you're chasing now. How do you get what's locked inside a pile of leaves into a form a crop can drink? 2 roads. Add water and soak the leaves, or add no water at all, pack them tight, and let them collapse under their own weight and drip. Hills pushed hard down that second road, and gardeners have been building versions of it ever since. A container with holes, a container underneath, weight on top. 68 years later, that's the rig in your yard. He also solved something nobody warns you about. The soaked version stinks, genuinely foul, the kind of smell that ends conversations across a fence. The no-water version is close to odorless. The fix wasn't adding something, it was leaving something out. And that one difference, water in or no water in, is the whole reason the internet cannot agree on how to dilute this stuff. You've seen the number. 1 part liquid, 10 parts water, until it looks like weak tea. It's on every video, every forum post, every card in every garden center. 1 to 10 is not a law. It's one answer to a question that has at least 2. Think of coffee. Pour 10 cups of water into a full pot, and you get colored water. Pour 10 cups into a single shot of espresso, and you get something drinkable. Same instruction, different result, because what came out of the machine was different. The Royal Horticultural Society splits it that way. Plant feeds made without added water, the concentrate your rig produces, roughly 1 to 20. Plant feeds made with water added, nearer 1 to 10. And there's evidence behind the split. Garden Organic had members across the UK make comfrey and nettle feeds in their own gardens, and mail samples to Coventry University. The 19 water-made pears came out close to a commercial tomato feed, already diluted and ready to pour. That recipe, the trial concluded, didn't need diluting further. The concentrated feeds were another story. Same plants, same people, same season. But potassium ran from about 700 milligrams per liter at the low end to nearly 4,900 at the high end, close to 7 times, from the same method and the same plant. Their conclusion: with variation like that, it's difficult to hand anyone one number and expect it to fit. So you stop treating any ratio as gospel and start weak. 1 to 20 is a reasonable place to begin. And note those figures come from comfrey and nettles. If your bucket is a mixed bag of weeds and trimmings, nobody has measured yours. There's one more thing buried in that trial, and it's the part I keep coming back to. Everybody knows the rule. Comfrey is the tomato feed, potassium for flowers and fruit. Nettles are for leafy growth. 2 plants, 2 jobs, standard advice for decades. Across those 19 pairs, the nettle feed carried about 50% more available nitrogen, and that held up statistically. But the potassium, the whole reason gardeners plant comfrey beds on purpose, came out only about 8% higher in the comfrey, and that gap didn't reach significance. The weed you were about to yank out of the fence line came within arm's reach of the plant people deliberately cultivate for fertilizer. Not that you should dig up your comfrey. It earns its place, a perennial you cut 4 or 5 times a season for 20 years. But if all you've got is a stand of nettles behind the shed, you're not working with a second-rate ingredient. And one finding quietly outranks both. The variation between gardens was larger than the variation between the 2 plants. A plant does not manufacture potassium. It takes it out of the ground it's standing in. Your feed can only be as rich as the soil that grew the leaves. Quick aside on how seriously this humble stuff has been taken. In 2006, France ended up in a national legal argument over whether a gardener's bucket of nettle liquid counted as a regulated plant protection product. It took until 2011 to settle on a framework, a bucket of weeds, in front of a legislature. So, what should actually go in yours? Green and growing, young weeds pulled before they flower, nettles, comfrey, healthy trimmings off your vegetables, tomato suckers, spent pea and bean vines, grass clippings in moderation, because a bucket of nothing but grass turns into a mat that won't drain. Now, the three I'd be careful with, because these are the ones that bite people. The first you can't see, smell, or taste: clippings off a treated lawn. Certain broadleaf herbicides used on lawns and pastures are built to persist. They survive the mower. They survive the compost pile. And they can come out the far end still active enough to twist and cup tomatoes, beans, and potatoes. Extension offices field these calls every summer, almost always from a gardener who did everything right and used contaminated hay or clippings. If you don't know what's been sprayed on that lawn, don't feed it to your garden. Second, seed heads and running roots. A weed pulled in flower is fine. A weed loaded with mature seed, or a chunk of bindweed root, is a different animal. And the real risk isn't the liquid. It's the leftover material in that inner bucket, the part you'll want to reuse. That's what carries something viable back into your beds, which is why the residue goes to a hot compost pile. Third, anything sick. Blight-spotted leaves, mildewed vines, a plant that died for reasons you can't explain. This system never gets hot enough to settle that question. And the flat no list: meat, dairy, grease, pet waste. Then it's fill, pack, cover, wait. Give it a week and nothing looks like it's happening. Around day 10 to 14, the first dark liquid shows up. By 2 to 3 weeks in warm weather, you have a real harvest, longer when it's cool. And there's no prize for going past about a month. That same garden organic work found brewing beyond 30 days didn't raise nutrient content. Now set your expectations for volume, because this is where people decide they failed. This is a concentrate system. You are not brewing 5 gallons of fertilizer. A packed bucket gives back a modest amount of dark liquid, closer to a jar than a jug. If 3 weeks go by and there's less down there than you pictured, that's usually the system working as designed. Leaving the water out is the whole reason what you collect is small and strong. Draw it off, open the spigot, or lift the inner bucket onto 2 bricks so it keeps draining, and pour the outer one into a jug. Strain through an old window screen and use it fresh, within a day or 2. Then dilute, starting at 1 to 20. And here's the thing almost nobody separates. Dilution and dose are different questions. 1 to 20 tells you how strong. It tells you nothing about how much. Nobody can hand you a universal amount, because it depends on the plant, the size of its root system, how much soil that system sits in, and how wet the soil already is. Anyone giving you one number for every plant is guessing. So use the principle instead. The diluted feed is a watering, not a dose of medicine. You're not tipping a shot glass at the base of the stem. You're watering the plant the way you'd normally water it, using diluted feed for that watering, instead of plain water, so the whole active root zone gets moistened. In the ground, that means wetting the soil out to roughly the spread of the leaves, because that's where the working roots are, not a puddle against the stem. In a container, it's the easiest call in gardening. Water the way you always do, until a little runs out the drainage hole. The pot tells you when it's enough. What you don't do is flood a plant, because more feed sounds like more growth. Once the root zone is wet, the extra runs past the roots and out of reach. And water the soil before you feed. Never pour concentrated anything onto dry ground. Early morning or evening, root zone, then water it in. Then, how often? Same honest answer. It depends on the plant, the soil, and how strong your batch was. But work from a conservative frame. A plant in decent, composted garden soil needs far less help than a plant in a pot. Established plants in good ground, every 2 to 3 weeks while they're actively producing, often less. Containers are the opposite case. Potting mix carries a limited charge of nutrients, and some of it leaves through the drainage hole every time you water. Those can take a feed every week to 10 days at the height of summer. But the rhythm matters more than the number. Feed, observe, wait, adjust, not feed. Feed again, because it was free. Free is exactly the trap. Who wants it? Anything actively growing and hungry. Tomatoes and peppers once fruit has set. Squash, cucumbers, melons, sweet corn, and container plants, which are running on empty by August. Who doesn't? Seedlings, too strong too soon. Anything transplanted in the last week or two, busy growing roots instead of leaves. Root crops, where nitrogen buys magnificent carrot tops and disappointing carrots. And leafy greens you'll harvest inside 2 weeks. Hygiene, not chemistry. Which brings up what this whole thing is really about. What should actually happen to your plants? Here's the honest answer, and it's more useful than a number. A leaf that's already fully grown doesn't change much. It's finished. It isn't going to turn a different shade of green overnight because you poured something around its ankles. So don't judge this by what yesterday's leaves do tomorrow. Watch what the plant builds next. That's where nutrition shows up. Over the following days and into the next week or two, on a plant that genuinely needed feeding, you're looking for stronger new shoots. New leaves coming in a better color than the ones before them. Flowering and fruit set continuing instead of stalling mid-season. A container plant holding its vigor into late summer instead of going pale and tired. That's what a working feed looks like. Not a trick performed overnight. Steady building. The signs you've gone too strong are just as readable. Scorched, brown, crisped leaf tips or edges. The classic salt stress picture, meaning the solution was too concentrated, or it went onto dry soil. A plant that wilts shortly after feeding when it wasn't wilting before, or one that throws a lot of soft, floppy leaf and stops setting flowers, which points to too much nitrogen for the stage it's in. If you see any of that, stop, water with plain water to move salts down past the roots, and start weaker next time. And 3 reactions worth knowing, because the wrong instinct is always to feed harder. If nothing happens at all, nutrition probably wasn't what was holding that plant back. Check water, check light, check whether the roots are compacted or circling in a pot. Fertilizer only fixes a shortage of fertilizer. If you get a mountain of leaf and almost no fruit, you've tipped toward nitrogen on a plant that's supposed to be fruiting. Back off and let it run a little lean. And if a plant is wilting from drought, don't feed it, water it. Feeding a dry, stressed root system is like handing dinner to somebody with the flu. Solve the water first, feed a day or 2 later. And one last thing on judging strength. Since the plant is your real instrument, color is the worst tool you have. 2 batches can look identical and be completely different. Color is a comfort, not a measurement. That's more than anyone should try to hold in their head, so I put it on paper. The build, the ingredient lists, dilution and dose, a feeding calendar by crop, a troubleshooting table. The Rooted Grace Blueprint, free, no email. Point your phone at the code on screen. And when you empty the bucket, don't waste what's left. That packed material is pre-broken down, cell walls collapsed, half the work already done. Dumped into a compost pile, it heats faster than fresh material ever does. 1 batch, 2 harvests. One last thought about growth, because that's what all of this is for. The best feed isn't the one that makes a plant do something spectacular for a weekend. It's the one that lets a plant keep building. The next leaf, the next flower, the next root, without you having to keep buying back what your own garden already produced. Because that comfrey didn't invent its potassium. Neither did the nettles. They pulled it out of the ground. Your ground, 3 feet from your tomatoes. Every year, gardeners weed a bed, bag the weeds, set them at the curb, and buy a sack of fertilizer to put back exactly what just drove away in the truck. The nutrients go out the front, the replacement comes in the front, and the ledger never balances. So this isn't really a fertilizer factory. It's a return address. Look at it again. 2 buckets somebody was going to throw out. A pile of weeds headed for a bag. A dark liquid you now know isn't compost tea. That you'd start at 1 to 20 instead of 1 to 10. Refined by a gardener in a rented Essex field before most of us were born. Nothing about it changed while you watched this. What changed is what you can see in it. 2 questions, and I want the arguments in the comments. Which weed do you pull the most of, and what do you do with it now? And if you grow comfrey on purpose, does that nettle result change anything? Or did the trial miss something? Some of you have run comfrey beds longer than that study has existed, and I'd rather hear from you than guess. The most satisfying part of all this isn't the jar of dark liquid. It's the moment you're carrying a handful of weeds toward the trash can, and you stop, and you turn around, because you finally know where they were supposed to go.